Okay, so welcome everybody to this session. We're going to be covering one of the other advisory groups for the EOSC Association, which covers metadata and data quality and semantic. It's the semantic interoperability and the FAIR metrics. And what we're going to do in the session, I'll give a very brief intro now just to how the session will run. We're going to hear about the two charters that fall under this advisory group. So the Semantic Interoperability Charter and the FAIR Metric Charter. And then we have three different blocks. We'll have 6 talks on semantic interoperability that are looking at standards in different disciplines and a little bit of Q&A. So put your questions in the chat as we go through. Then we'll have a block on FAIR metrics and data quality, where we have 3 talks on different tools and a bit of Q&A afterwards, and then 3 talks on potential solutions. So without further ado, I'll invite the first speaker, which is Martin Horsch, who's going to tell us about the Semantic Interoperability Task Force Charter.
Yeah, many thanks. First, I have to apologize. You see on the previous slide, I have been introduced with very many affiliations. My affiliation is actually the High Performance Computing Center in Stuttgart, and that is a classical data ingest problem. When I saw the form, I misunderstood what information was expected at this place, and this has now carried over into the program. And that's the sort of problem that the Semantic Interoperability Task Force is supposed to help avoid in the future. Let's go to the next slide. The basis for that drafting and the overall work is the EOSC interoperability framework, where really a detailed program has already been identified, with also a dedicated section targeting semantic interoperability. All interoperability requires semantic interoperability, so that's tightly connected to everything from that framework. And here, what had been identified in particular was that there's a heterogeneity among disciplines. In some disciplines, there's a lack of metadata standards. In other disciplines, there's an overabundance. But what was identified to be generally lacking was working cross-disciplinary approaches. And here the emphasis is on developing principled approaches. Now, those do exist. Foundational ontologies are discipline independent, and they're also, in principle, very thoroughly documented. Only they're not documented in a way that is easily understood by domain practitioners, including most implementers of data infrastructures. So there's a gap here, and gaps were also identified and needs concerning working ways for federating and harvesting for heterogeneous infrastructures, and also in developing repositories for semantic artifacts. So that's the starting point. Let's go to the next slide. This is where we start. And apologies here for the format. This is because of PowerPoint, LibreOffice, lack of interoperability. Now, the task force cannot do all that work by itself. That is obvious. That is a general issue with EOSC. We need to guide and involve the community, and that's the main focus of the whole work, which is structured into 3 objectives: exploration, knowledge exchange, and recommendations, where the latter point means that 2 years from now, we want to be at the next iteration of the EOSC interoperability framework, having solved some of the issues and advanced them, and having gained a better understanding of what is to be done. If you look into the exploration objectives, they include ontology alignment or crosswalks, as it is called in the EOSC context, and also the issue of catalogs for metadata standards and preservation of semantic artifacts. About the membership, you see the team that drafted the charter down here. For the eventual membership, we did not say how many members are required, but what competencies are required. And this has as a consequence that there will rather need to be a relatively large group because of all the domains that need to be addressed and all the competencies that are required. Then let's continue. because at the center of all the work of the task force, we have community engagement, knowledge exchange, and consultations. Here you see that in the timeline we include the organization of 2 workshops, including a hackathon, including discussion of a draft recommendations for the next iteration of the EOSC interoperability framework. And the whole work has a strong orientation toward semantic interoperability as a practice. How is it made operational? And that is best studied by looking at concrete demonstrator case studies. In our draft charter, you find a list, relatively large, of such concrete case studies that can be of interest to projects that exist, so that there is funding available in principle to study all those cases. And I guess it's best to refer to the document for them, because we don't have time to look into those in detail. What we can say is that for the task force to be successful, it needs to connect very tightly to several other task forces. That includes fair metrics and data quality. We are grouped into one session here and into one advisory group. That group also has case studies. And if you look into those, they are in principle also semantic interoperability case studies, and vice versa. Ours are also potential data quality case studies. The same goes for technical interoperability. That is obvious. Everything needs to be realized technically, and the technical realization imposes requirements on metadata standardization. And the PIDs are also closely related if you look at PID graphs. With that, let's stop this presentation. Many thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Martin. I really appreciated those practical examples of how interoperability fails and makes things difficult for us. Now, Sean's just put something in chat. See the advantages of being able to do crosswalks, and we're doing this between experiments across our domain. The appetite to integrate into a higher level ontology is not really there. Our metadata standards is so heavily community specific that even I don't understand 3/4 of the science fields. I don't know if you want to reflect on that, about a kind of high level standard just for discovery, or?
Yeah, that wasn't a question. That was a description of the state of the art as it is described in the interoperability framework, and it is very correct.
Yeah, and Claudia has just said the issues of metadata and semantic interoperability has been discussed extensively in EOSC-Life, and I'm sure other cluster projects. How is the interaction with the clusters? How is that going to be managed?
I cannot comment on that. Maybe someone else from the group of drafters, because
I can say something on that. Andrea Schamast here. So we are very much aware that on that kind of generic question, there's a lot of work going on currently and has been. And there are also more fundamental issues. For instance, if it goes to, how was it phrased, the appetite for a higher level ontology. I don't think we have no appetite, but we are also aware that that it needs to be sorted out to which purpose higher level ontologies are actually applied. Concerning the ongoing work, one of the ideas we had is that and that's already represented in the large group of authors, that we bring together the projects in which we are already involved and the networks we are already involved, and that we probably very practically start with a survey at the beginning to kind of revitalize or make sure that we have covered that, and then pick out very concrete work. So the task force is aimed to kind of, on the workflow level, give a platform for mutual presentation of work across domains, so across networks which usually would not touch or only kind of very briefly touch with each other. So the width of the group in terms of disciplines, I think this is the real asset of the composition we had in the preparation of the draft cluster.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Andrea. And I think that's something that will be important, you know, as the people apply for membership and we form the groups, because we need to make sure we're representing all the different disciplines. There's a couple of other comments, but I think we're going to have to move on. But just the importance of not over-engineering, making sure we're linking between standards. And yeah, we can pick all of those up. So the next presentation is on fair metrics and data quality and that charter. And it's Ilona von Stein who's going to present for us.
Thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. So my name is Ilona von Stein and I work with DANS, and I'm very happy to share with you today, very briefly, the work we have been doing on drafting the charter around the task force for fair metrics and data quality. Next slide. So like with all task force charters, this process has really been a community effort. We have 21 contributors. It was quite a lot, also quite challenging to come into one comprehensive document, but we tried our best. On the right-hand side, you see the drafting coordinators. So they are Stefano Coccini from Italy, Christine Hadroszek from France, Carlo Lagina from Spain, and myself. We had a couple of dedicated meetings and co-sprints, co-writing sprints, which resulted in the draft at hand. And you can find it online, or perhaps someone can also share it in the chat. That would be great. Next slide. So we have identified a couple of main aims for this task force. The first main aim is to oversee the implementation of fair metrics for the EOSC. We are aware that quite a lot of work has been done already in this field, but now we think the time is there to start doing and start testing them with research communities. So yeah, these metrics are also fit for purpose. So the clear focus is on implementation and testing and not on definition as such. Aside of fair metrics, our main aim is to also consider more general aspects of data quality in the context of EOSC. Both strands of work, they have a various level of activity, implementation, and uptake in the EOSC at hand. So for example, for fair metrics, there has been described like a workflow from principles to indicators to metrics and initial tests. And in the context of EOSC, for data quality, this is less explored, but we think it's crucial to have these two together in the task force. Next slide. A couple of more sentences about the fair metrics strand of work. We think that the success of the fair metrics are very dependent on the uptake of communities. And therefore, we want to test them in a variety of contexts and disciplines with broad consultation. That's very important. Ultimately, we would like to make recommendations also about the improvement and the application of existing metrics. And if it comes to the point that, yes, there might be user communities that have different ideas about the existing metrics, of course, that's perfectly fine. But then we will suggest, or we actually will propose to do this all through via the RDA Fair Data Maturity Model. It will not be something that our task force will be doing itself. And with this work, we will build on the recommendations on fair metrics for EOSC, as you see on the right side. Next slide. Then data quality. So what we would like to do there, because it's less explored at this moment in the context of EOSC, I must say, we would like to see and explore the most relevant quality dimensions considered in different communities. And the question will be then, what can usefully be taken from this for EOSC? Are there, for example, commonalities across disciplines? What can the EOSC learn and take from that? The data quality strand of work would like to make preliminary recommendations for quality assessments of EOSC data. Next slide. Our working methodology is also very much use case driven approach. So we thought use cases would be a pragmatic way to develop a cross-domain uptake. For us, it's also very important that we don't work in use case silos, but we will also focus on commonalities, lessons learned, and challenges between the use cases. So there we see the added value of such a task force body under the EOSC Association. Of course, we can also imagine various workshops or other forms of interaction. In terms of outputs, what we would like to do, or what the task force would like to do, is in the first couple of months draw in community inputs, and we'll have proposed an iterative reporting with community feedback mechanisms built inside for the remainder of the task force. We proposed 24 months. If you're interested, you can find more about this in the charter online. Next
if I can
slide.
ask you to wrap it up a little bit, if that's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So this is my last slides with the dependencies. So yeah, I think I'll highlight only the second topic, which is the collaboration with other task forces. We've identified them as well, of course, very important. Next and last slide, please. The membership task force. Also, for your interest, we have identified some skills and requirements if you're interested in becoming a member. The most important of which is, I think, the size of the group. We would like to keep it manageable, efficient, and reactive. So that will we have identified for the membership. Next slide. And here are all the contributors. And thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Excellent. So the only kind of questions that have come up are around, data quality, how we judge that, or accuracy, and why EOSC should be an arbiter on that. I think one thing I'd maybe flag there is that we were concerned when we first thought about these task forces that FAIR doesn't really cover data quality, and people had raised that in the consultation as an aspect, which is why it had been put in this group. But I don't know if you want to reflect on discussions in the group around the quality at all, Ilona?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, this is very interesting, and it came later into the process, like Sarah just said, and I think it's very crucial to explore the relation at this point. I think FAIR contains some quality dimensions like accuracy, accessibility, interoperability, reproducibility. But of course, I'm also aware that the original FAIR data authors, they say we don't include data quality as such, but it's something that needs to be explored specifically in this task force, I think.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the next block, which is a semantic interoperability session. And we'll kick off with the Reliance project with Daniel Garijo. Apologies for any mispronunciations in names. Daniel, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. Perfect.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to be talking about metadata models and research subjects for the Earth observation data cubes, which is a collaboration with many other people in the Reliance project. Next slide, please. So, first of all, a small description of what Reliance is. Reliance stands for the Research Life Cycles and Management Technologies for Earth Science Communities and Copernicus Users in EOSC. And we aim to seek the we aim to extend EOSC capabilities by enhancing support for research activities, by elaborating a series of industry-strong interconnected services aligned with the EOSC interoperability framework. Our approach, of course, focuses on Copernicus data and use cases. And in fact, we have three main earth science communities which focus on climate change, also sea monitoring and geohazards, and we handle them with an open call, and well, we also support other use cases, but these are the three main communities we are focusing on at the moment. So next slide, please. And here is where we come to the concepts of data cubes. And what is a data cube for us? I think it's very important to define this because unfortunately it's a quite overloaded term. And we use as data cubes as collections of geospatially related data that contain multi-temporal time series at different resolution and observations. So what we did is that we want to treat these resources as first-class citizens because they are incredibly important for the use cases that we want to support for each of these communities. And we started, of course, looking at the work that is already there, for example, from the aggregators of the EOSC platforms already. Next slide, please. And the first thing that we have done is a state-of-the-art going over different, with a thorough analysis of different data catalogs. We have gone through different data catalog, 15 different data catalogs from different community registries in the different domain sciences, including marine research, volcanology, climate research, and others. And we have found that there are usual metadata models used commonly across them, like some ISO, CMIP, NetCDF, DataSite, and schema.org. Next slide, please. And what we have done is with this work together with, by collaborating with the core communities, we have started to elaborate a series of competency questions such as the ones illustrated in this slide, which, for example, ask what are the data sets that have been used in a project, what are the specific variables that are found within a region, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. And what we have come up by reusing and looking at all these metadata standards is a proposal for a metadata model divided in different layers. One general metadata layer, then a credit licensing and pricing layer, because sometimes, unfortunately, the data may not be open. A coverage metadata layer, which includes spatial, temporal, and vertical. Vertical here, it's very, very important because when you are taking cores out of the sea, the depth at which you do the observation is very, very important. And finally, data acquisition and product information layer, which include things like the variable that we are interested in, the provenance of the information, like the instrument that was used to extract the observation data, and so on and so forth.
Just 1 minute left, Daniel. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. No worries. So what we are doing is creating an Earth science research object crate specific metadata model, and taking into account all these layers that I have just been introduced. Some of the metadata properties are described in the slide. And my final slide, please. Next slide. So in summary, what we are doing in this project in Reliance is to build research objects that take Earth science data cubes and consider them as first-class resources by using a layered metadata model and crosswalk between common standards that are well used by different registries within the domain scientists. We are integrated in with the research object model by aggregating different research artifacts with the research arrow crate standard that is being developed by the community. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much. If you have any questions.
Perfectly to time too. Thank you very much, Daniel. So there weren't any questions in chat yet, just a link from Patricia that might be of interest for your work. Oh, sorry, that's because I put a timer on, so now it's actually beeping in the background. So we'll move on to the next talk. And we do have time for questions at the end. There should be 10 minutes for questions. So this talk's going to be on the eLTER framework, and it's by Barbara Magagna.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present to you the iAdopt framework in the context of the eLTER long-term ecosystem research infrastructure. Next slide, please. So in order to implement the eLTER research infrastructure, eLTER is building on the legacy of eLTER Europe with its site network established in 26 countries, comprising in total over 450 long-term monitoring sites and about 35 LTSCR platforms dealing with socio-ecological research. Many of these sites have a long monitoring history, providing long-term data for more than 30 years. So focusing on a whole system approach addressing all ecosystem compartments ranging from atmosphere to the geosphere, including the societal interactions to the natural environment, main ecosystem processes are monitored at an eLTER site, thus enabling the linkage of change drivers and responses. eLTER covers not only the main ecosystem types on the European scale, but also a broad range of biogeographic regions. So different types of eLTER sites like master or focal sites are focusing on different layers of the ecosystem, but still linked to the whole system approach. With the upcoming eLTER research infrastructure, basic services from data to site access will be provided on about 200 innovative hubs. Next slide, please. Following the ecological integrity framework, which was mapped to the essential biodiversity variables, eLTER selects a set of core standard observations which show a high sensitivity to environmental change and are of critical relevance for environmental modeling. These variables range from abiotic heterogeneity to biodiversity, including socioeconomic and socio-ecological data. Next slide, please. The big data challenges eLTER has to approach are the broad scientific scope, the heterogeneity of the input data, the lack of application to exploit linked data. And furthermore, we will have to represent the variables of the standard observations with ENFTES. This is the semantic backbone of the eLTER network. And for this purpose, we have to extend ENFTES in such a way that it is interoperable with other semantic descriptions of other research infrastructures. And for this purpose, I have co-initialized the RDA Research Data Alliance Working Group IADOPT. This is a group of terminology providers and data center managers addressing the semantic interoperability of observable properties alias variables. We have developed a semantic framework and an ontology which will be published right in these days for machine readable and interoperable variable descriptions by mapping its components to fair vocabulary terms. Next slide, please. So an IADOPT variable combines all descriptive components that are needed to represent what was observed or derived and includes at least one property and one object of interest. Next slide. So a property is the type of characteristic of the entity playing the role of an object of interest. And an object of interest is the entity whose property is observed. A matrix is an entity in which the object of interest is contained. The context object is the entity that provides additional information related to the object of interest, while a constraint may limit the scope of any entities that are involved in the variable description. Next slide, please. So here an example to illustrate how to apply the framework. For the variable nitrate in river water, it will be essential to also include a good textual definition, adding the information of the specific, is this a content or concentration variable? So the property is, in the latter case, the concentration. The object of interest is nitrate, and the matrix is water, and the context object in this case is river, representing the ecosystem in which the variable has been observed. So next slide, please. As you can see, for each of the terms, we could find already ENFTES terms to relate to via specific associations. But for more complex variable descriptions, new terms might be minted or reused from other vocabularies, other terminologies, for an accurate representation. And in the upcoming months, so in the summertime, because we are at the last stage of the RDA working group, we will write RDA endorsed recommendations and model a considerable amount of variables across different domains, from environmental to social to health domain, and provide this as examples. And the OGC ISO standards group for O&M and sensor things is also considering already the adoption of our framework. So I really hope that this will be a contribution and will be one of the crosswalks considered in the EOSC interoperability framework. And I hope to get somehow a chance to get into your working group, or that this work that we did over 3 years now be adopted. So Excellent. If you are interested to get more insights, join us or look at our RDA wiki page. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Fantastic. Really interesting work, and I'm sure it will be picked up in the interoperability framework. Okay, so the next talk is from Niklas Selke on the TOAR database.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to show you what we are doing in terms of semantic interoperability with our TOAR database. Next slide, please. So first of all, what is the TOAR database? TOAR stands for the Tropospheric Ozone Assessment Report, and is a scientific activity which analyzes the tropospheric ozone. And in order to do so, we created a database of surface ozone data, which was measured on different stations all over the world. And currently our database has roughly 13,000 measurement sites saved, and in total of about 104,000 time series of ozone data, ozone precursors, and some other meteorological data like temperatures. And all of this data is accessible through REST API. And most of the data comes from governmental agencies, but we have also individuals who run a small network of stations contributing data, which leads to the problem that especially the metadata come in various forms, so to speak, and we have to somehow unify them in order to actually save them consistently in our database. Next slide, please. So we introduced a controlled vocabulary where we define a specific set of identifiers that we will use for the database columns as well as for the values in these columns. And then we formalized our controlled vocabulary in an ontology, and both of them, so the ontology and the controlled vocabulary, can be accessed through the same REST API where you would get access to the data themselves. I've put a quick example here. So for the for measurement side, one aspect is the station type, which could either be, in our case, unknown, background, traffic, or industrial, which would be the identifier set by the controlled vocabulary. And in an ontology, you would see, first of all, the class of station meta, where the station type is a subclass of and has the entities of unknown, background, traffic, or industrial. Next slide, please. So even with the controlled vocabulary in place, there's of course the possibility that we get additional metadata from some of our data providers that we do not specify in our controlled vocabulary. And in order to not lose any information we are given, we introduced an additional field in the database called additional metadata, which is a JSON field and stores any extra information we are given in a JSON structure, and then in return can also be accessed like any other metadata field, the database. Next slide, please. Another thing we do is versioning. So whenever we get a new time series, it gets an initial version number, and then over time, if we get a revised version of that same time series, we would save that in a database under a new version number, which in return allows a user to access a set or a collection of data points and at any point in time, and for example, some analysis on them, and later on come back to that same set, even if the set had over time changed. So if you would provide the specific version number, you would get the same set in that version back. Next slide, please.
And just to know, it's just 1 minute left, but yeah. I think you're fine time-wise.
And the last thing we do is also do some data quality assurance. So even though most of the data we get is already quality controlled by the providers themselves, because we have so many different ones. They do that to different standards and with different methods and so on. So we decided to create our own data quality tool that runs some tests on its own and comes up with a quality flag for each data point in a time series by itself. And then what we actually save in the database is the combination of the given flag with our own flag to, in the best way possible, show a user how trustworthy each data point we have or provide actually is. Next slide, please. So my final slide, just to conclude, is the controlled vocabulary and the ontology together with the versioning and the data quality assurance leads to semantic interoperability and to a really reusable and accessible data. Thank you very much.
Excellent, and perfectly to time as well. So thank you actually to all the speakers for keeping so prompt. Now, we originally thought we had 6 talks in this session, but we actually only have 5 because Simon isn't here to represent NMAPS. So we will move straight on to the next talk, which is Steve Collins. Steve, I hope this doesn't take you by surprise, but if you're available and ready to speak about your act straight away, that would be great.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I'm from Diamond Light Source, and I talk very briefly about ontologies for photon and neutron science. I can't obviously describe them in this time, so if you're interested, please capture the screen and look at this Zenodo reference. So for anyone who doesn't know, the European photon and neutron community is a number of things. It's big, it's very big, tens of thousands of researchers, tens of facilities, tens of petabytes of data per year, tens of thousands of scientific publications per year. But even more impressive is the diversity or range of science disciplines that it covers. And our researchers use multiple facilities across multiple countries. And these facilities are really beginning to get to grips with the idea of making the data open and fair. So we have an urgent need to harmonize fair data across facilities for our domain and also for our domain users, and also to our external data consumers, which we're increasingly starting to think about. So this speaks to both intraoperability and interoperability. And this is really the central theme of 2 big EU grants based on EOSC. So this is EXPANS and PANOSC grants. And there's a work package in EXPANS to develop photon and neutron ontology. So this is what the work's about. So there are 2 classes of concepts that are really relevant. One is the concepts which really cut across our domain, such as sample object description, science subject description and context, and generic catalog terms, but also we're interested in concepts that are really within our domain, where we consider ourselves to be the owners and domain experts. And these include photon and neutron technique description and the physical conditions of experiments, which is really covered by our own Nexus metadata model. So if I could have the second and final slide, please. Thank you. So the 2 ontologies that we've really focused on are, first of all, photon and neutron techniques. So this is essentially at the moment a classification of techniques where we define the techniques on a spreadsheet and convert them automatically to an OWL file. And this allows us to create subsets and intersections of technique classes to give a rudimentary semantic description of the techniques. The second one is ontology of Nexus definitions. So again, this is automatically created, this time from the Nexus XML definitions. The object here, or one of the main objects, is to flatten the Nexus vocabularies and to bring out the relationships between the Nexus concept types. But both of these have the goals of creating, largely for catalog services, largely to create controlled vocabularies with global persistent identifiers using Perl.org, to add annotations and references, and to give us something expressed in OWL that we can use to create mappings to other ontologies. And we've actually started to develop a specific mapping ontology to connect us to the outside world. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Fantastic. And over a minute under, so you're getting us more time for questions, which is amazing. So I'm going to move on to the final talk then, which is Casper Andersen talking about the SIF, ontologizing SIF in crystallography.
Excellent, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to share this work. So this is a culmination of an EMMC task group, so EMMC being the European Materials Modeling Council. And also sprung up from another EU project, the Marketplace project, in an attempt to create an ontology for crystallography. Next, please. So to really do this, you go to the source, or the standardization source anyway. So that's the International Union of Crystallography, the IUCR, and they have this excellent format called SIF, and it's twofold. So it's the crystallographic information file, which is a simple file format, which you can share crystal information, material information, and which the previous speaker is probably aware of, as this is a bit into that field as well. And then it's also an acronym for the Crystallographic Information Framework, which is really the set of dictionaries that define all the fields that can go into this SIF file. And on top of the dictionaries, you then have the dictionary definition language, or the DDL. So it's twofold. Next slide, please. And this is an example of schematizing or outlining the semantic relations in this dictionary definition language. So it's very meta-meta. On the right side, you can see how it's written out. And this is all open source, and this is the format it's into, and then the semantic relations is on the left. It's fine that you can't see, it's just as an example. Next slide, please. Now the actual dictionaries and the definitions of all the fields that go into it, you can see on the right here that just one simple category has a lot of different fields. And so there are a lot of different concepts to ontologize and to turn into something that can be managed for interoperability and better work. So we want to kind of optimize it, but also keep the semantic understanding intact. Next slide, please. And so what we've done in this task group is to combine the people from the domain, the experts there, and ontology experts. And since this is an EMMC task group, we are we're drawing all of our ontology experts from the EMO community, which is the European Materials Modeling Ontology. Now, for the IUCR community, what they want is, of course, to have more interoperability between the concepts of the SIF file and the crystallographic concepts that are within. And on the EMO community side, there is a desire to develop domain ontologies for structure characterization, atomistic modeling, and so on. So the names there in the bottom, the color is actually representative of which one belongs to each community. And James Hester is one that is one of the main authors for SIF 2.0, and there's also some people from large materials databases. I put myself in purple because I consider myself a bit of both, but I'm probably more red-shifted anyway. Also, it's worth noting here that this is not just a European effort, but worldwide. So ANSTO is in Australia. We have Stuart Chalk from University of North Florida, and so on. Next slide, please. So the aim of the task group is twofold. First of all, we want to create ontologies based on the existing SIF dictionaries. So these should be generated, auto-generated, to ensure both consistency and ease of maintenance, because there are a lot of things there. So it should be automated. Second of all, based on this SIF ontology, we then want to create a more general domain ontology that is EMO compliant. And so we will base this on the SIF core dictionary, and there we can also expand on some crystallographic concepts that are not explicitly included in the CIF core dictionary. Next slide, please. So this is an attempt to show the approach that we're going to take. So on the top, we're going to develop a CIF top ontology, which outlines essentially this DDL. It adheres to the dictionary definition language and tries to ontologize how these CIF dictionaries are outlined and the semantic relations between them. So this will be manually done. Then one level lower, all of these individual dictionaries can be ontologized and relate to the CIF top ontology. And then even further below, we can then create domain ontologies that relate to the CIF concepts and also directly to EMO. And essentially you could create others as well that relate to other top level ontologies if you want. Next slide,
just
please.
1 minute left if you can wrap up.
All right, I'll try. So this is just a concept of how it looks in action, that this is our schema work in progress. One part is so the most important thing here is the horizontal line where you can see at the top, we have the CIF top ontology that is basically the schematization of how the dictionaries work together. And the bottom is then an example of one of the fields in a CIF dictionary and how it relates to that CIF top ontology. Next slide, please. And yeah, this is a reiteration of what I said. So we are actually reusing relations from EMO, which provides more strong theoretical foundation for all the relations. It's not just has part, but has spatial part. So there's some dimensionality in there, so on. And it makes it easier to then relate it directly to EMO, even though it isn't now. Yes, all right. So, okay, this is just an example of how the CIF core looks in Protégé. On the right there, you can see the class count is over 1,200. So there are a lot of classes to consider. Next slide, please. And this is then an example of the more general domain ontology and how, for example, the concept of a unit cell, you don't need to know what that is, but it relates to the CIF concept of cell, and these are exactly equivalent too. So in this way, you can then create more ontologies that directly relate to CIF concepts. Next, please. Finally, I'd like to mention 2 slides on the Optimate efforts. So this is another effort to create a single API specification for representing material science databases. And something that we are actually releasing or publishing a paper on this year, the Optimate specification. There's some links there. And next slide, please. Related to this, we are also developing an Optimate ontology, which will be based on this CIF ontology as well. And in October, we're having a workshop for this, which I'd like to plug very quickly, the OMD 2021. And you can go to the optimate.org/OMD 2021 to register if you want. This will be partially online and offline. And I need to mention that this is, I forgot this in the presentation, this is sponsored by the SciK network and the Swedish eScience Research Center, as well as Marvel. Final slide, please. This is the acknowledgement. So all this work is made possible with Marvel, from Marvel, Marketplace Project, an EUH 2020 project. And of course, these are all, again, the names of the EMC crystallography task group. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So we have about 8 minutes or so left for discussion, and there have been a number of questions in chat, as well as some discussion. I think Daniel, Carol, Stian and others have been talking about the metadata crosswalks. But the first question comes from Andrea Scharnhorst, asking Daniel, Barbara and Nicholas. She's curious how you've internally organized the overview of different data repositories and ontologies in your projects. Is it just lists or tables or other visuals? I don't know if any of you want to reflect on how you've organized that.
Yeah, usually we use tables. As I shared, I think, a couple of links to the CSVs that we are actually using to compare the overview of the different repositories, because it's the best, I think it's the best approach when you need to discuss and compare how you would translate one resource to the other.
Can I also say something? So in our working group, we did an extensive survey on terminologies related to variable descriptions, and we have gathered around 100. And we are doing, we have now a catalog that will be published. So it's at the moment a Google Sheet, but it will be published by end of the summer in GitHub and made available. So from there, we get the terms for our variable descriptions, and we also, organize them around our model. But this is only a time, so one time spot, right? So this has to be updated after a while. So we hope to go into a governance mode so that we can update this.
Fantastic, thanks, Barbara. Okay, there were a couple of questions as well. I think these were all directed at Niklas about the TOAR database. I'll read out the three of them and hopefully you can reflect on them together. So Sylvie Lebras had asked what your data quality criteria are. Kurt Baumann had asked whether you've had arguments between yourselves and data providers regarding assignment of different quality flags. And oh, I've made a typo when I've been copy and pasting. Sean DeVitt apparently asked exactly the same question. I assume he asked something different. I'll go back and look what's in the chat, but if you want to reflect on those first.
Yeah, so for the data quality, we currently mainly do some checks on outliers in time series and behaviors in terms of spikes in time series, or just especially if you have missing values in the middle of time series, we check the surrounding area for unusual behavior, because normally you don't have very sudden changes in ozone series or other like temperatures or so. But this is very much still a work in progress, this tool, and so in future we probably come up with more criteria we will check for.
Excellent. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I would have gone on to the second question. So
yeah, so I found the other question that I'd copy pasted wrong. It was Kurt Baumann who'd actually asked about versioning, how it's possible to refer or reactivate older versions. You showed us details from the monitoring.
Yeah, so the version itself is saved with each data point. So when you access them through the REST API, you can query for them like any other argument to get the specific version back. And yeah, to the last open question with the did we have arguments with data providers about assigning our own flags? I have to say, not so far as to my knowledge, but I am mostly not the one directly involved or directly talking to the data providers, but at least I haven't heard from other people in the group I'm working in that there were any problems so far.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Niklas. And we had a couple of questions as well to Casper. Martin Horsch had asked, how do you deal with the problem of applying the MO foundational approach to data items?
Yeah, so I tried to answer in the chat as well. This is a very theoretical question, but the easy answer is that the SIF ontology itself is actually not MO compliant. We are stealing bits and pieces for the relations, so it's only implicitly compliant. So it's not something we have to consider in that case. A more in-depth answer would be that we're trying to ontologize the presentation of data in the SIF format and not the actual data, right? So that will become it's a bit different. It's a bit meta, but I think these are more considerations that we'll have to take when we create the more general crystallography domain ontology. But luckily we have Emanuele Chiedini to help us through that jungle. He's the main author of the MO.
Mm-hmm. And there was one other question directed to you. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it in chat, but it's from Sean DeVitt. If one copy of the data item is in Lausanne and one is in Trondheim, so they're not in the same space-time entity, how do they relate to each other?
No, that's the same question. He answered it.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. No, it wasn't from you, Sean? Okay. Sorry, I'm having problems managing the chat and kind of managing the time. So I think we've actually covered all the questions then. Graham Smith just put one in. I imagine there are some unique challenges around user tasks in discovering and reusing data on this scale. Wondering if different parts of FAIR pose more specific problems I don't know if anyone wants to reflect on that.
Yeah, that sounds like it's, oops, yes, it sounds like it's one for me. I'm just trying to digest the question. Some unique challenges around, it's moving up the screen, user tasks in discovering and reusing data on this scale. Yes, probably. Yeah, I think I'm still trying to understand the question, actually. But yeah, I mean, I think our initial focus is kind of to make raw data available to be reused and to, focus on interoperability. I do think as time goes on, we will, focus more on discovering processed data rather than reprocessing raw data. And that in itself will present major problems. And I think one of the major problems will be to have an adequate description of the context of the experiment, down to the fine details of why the experiment was done, what materials were involved, what was the motivation, what were the expected results. And because I don't think we really have any kind of metadata on that level of fine granularity, which would allow people to go straight to the scientific knowledge that they're interested in. So I think that's a big challenge for the future.
Thanks very much, Steve. So Graham apologizes he can't go on mic, but hopefully that's answered it. If not, by all means, keep putting things in chat and we'll pick them up as we go along. So thanks to the speakers in that first session, we're now going to have a block on fair metrics and data quality. And our first presenter is Maaike Verburg on the Fair Aware tool.
Yes, hi everyone. I will kick off this session on metrics and data quality with the Fair Aware tool. Next slide, please. The Fair Aware tool is created as a service from the FAIR project. The FAIR project has the goal of fostering fair data practices in Europe and specifically facilitating practical solutions for the use of the FAIR principles throughout the entire research data lifecycle. The project has a budget of 10 million and a duration of 3 years, and it will come to an end in February of next year. It's a collaboration between 22 different partners from 8 different member states, and Dans is the project lead on this project. The image on the right shows the different outputs of the FAIR project, which immediately highlights the vast majority and differences of the topics covered in this project. The one we'll look at specifically right now is highlighted in the certification section, and it's about data assessment tools. Next slide, please. The Fair Aware tool is a tool that is aimed at researchers and data stewards, but it can be used by any stakeholder in the scientific ecosystem. And it's aimed to raise awareness and educate people on the fair data principles. So it's not a metric in the sense where it evaluates the data object, but you evaluate yourself, which is actually the step that comes before creating a good data object. So using 10 simple questions, which are enriched with guidance text, you can score yourself on the different FAIR principles and get an insight on which points you are already creating really good data sets and on which points you can still improve. Next slide, please. So the process of using this tool is quite simple and straightforward. You take your time to go through the tool at your own pace. It's best to do it with a specific data set in mind, and you can take as long or as short as you want and have the time for. And you can use all the resources presented in the tool to further enrich your knowledge and develop FAIR skills. As the tool is still in development, we also have a feedback section in which you can indicate which parts are difficult, which parts are missing, and what we can do to make the tool more user-friendly and more relevant for the different stakeholders. After you submit your answers, you get an overview of how aware you are, as well as how willing you are to comply to the different FAIR principles. And then all that's left to do is to spread the word, because this tool can be a really nice conversation starter in your community or your research group to discuss certain shared obstacles or problems, and also discuss ways you can maybe solve this or implement specific new practices or policies to make things easier for creating fair data sets. Next slide, please. I have here an overview of the current status of the tool. As I said, we are continuously developing it throughout the Fair is Fair project, and the tool already also has guaranteed sustainability beyond the lifetime of that project with DANS. As you can see, over 80% of our users find the tool useful, and as of now we have a little bit over 200 users in a year. And you can see that the spread of different domains is quite nice. Mostly the social sciences and humanities and life sciences use our tool, but other domains also have used our tool quite a lot. And the same goes for different roles and different types of organizations. We see a nice spread. And sometimes we also get really nice feedback, such as this, which shows that the tool has a really nice use for the communities and for research supporters to tailor their specific trainings or interventions in their organizations. Next slide. That's already the end. It's a very practical, very straightforward tool, so I can be really short about it. I'm happy to answer some questions right now, and if you have any further questions or you want to share your personal experiences with me, you can do so on the email or Twitter account that I mentioned. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And there's already appreciation for the tool in the chat too. So we'll move on to the next talk, which is Fairness in Cryo-Electron Microscopy Data Analysis by Irina Sanchez.
Hi, everyone. In the next 5 minutes, I'm going to explain what the research infrastructure in Structural Biology Institute ERIC have done within the EOSC-Life project for helping the Cryo-EM facility users the deposition of data and preprocessing workflows in a standardized way in order to increase its reuse by the scientific community. Next slide, please. So how a cryo-electron microscopy data analysis usually works? Well, first of all, researchers from 13 labs send their samples to a cryo-EM facility. Then the cryo-EM facility starts an acquisition session in which data can be preprocessed with software like STFC. When this process finishes, the facility sends back the raw data, that is the movies and the STFC project, to the lab. I have to say that for improving this, we have made several proofs of concept using the One Data technology, and we hope to release a STFC plugin soon. And finally, in the lab, the data analysis process will continue with the aim to build a good 3D structure. Next slide, please. So how can this performed in a fairness way? Well, for example, by making this data and process findable and accessible in Empire, the public database developed and maintained by ABI, the European Bioinformatics Institute. In this way, and by using a STFC plugin, the Cryo-EM facility user can create an Empire entry, performing a first deposition with the raw data and the workflow in JSON format that describes the preprocessing steps and automatically transferring the entry ownership to the lab user. Next slide, please. Then the lab user continues with the data analysis and will update that entry as many times as he wants, providing intermediate data, a JSON file with the Empire metadata schema, and not only the updated workflow in JSON format, but a link to an entry from the public workflow repository Workflow Hub, which consists on a raw create object with the workflow in common workflow language format, enriched with terms from the Cryo-EM ontology that can be checked at these links from Ontology Lookup Service, BioPortal, and FireSharing. However, the submission to Workflow Hub functionality is still under development, since we depend on the Workflow Hub team to release some improvements in its API. Next slide, please. And last but not least, the lab user could enrich the Empire entry with a web viewer that allows to anyone to check the data quality at a glance. So if the data analysis process looks interesting to someone, he could reuse and reproduce it by downloading the movies and the JSON workflow and importing it in the Scipion framework. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So our final talk in this block is by Jörg Geiger on standardized provenance information for biological specimens.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, my name is Jörg Geiger. I'm from the field of biomedical, so I'm researching in systems, medicine systems biology, and heading a biobank. So I'm looking at a particular view at all these issues. Due to the very limited time slot, I will not go into details of the our concept. So if you're more interested in that, I can recommend some papers on that. The motivation to do this, it has gone a bit strange here. The formatting has been changed, but no problem. So is that provenance information for specimen and data, in particular in specimen, is absolutely indispensable when we're talking about quality and fitness for purpose. But also, if we got to verify the origin and source of the particular specimen and the data, and to verify whether they are really in existence and that none are faked or something like that. We got to support validation and certification because we are talking of a field which is highly regulated when we're talking about medicine or biomedicine, as well as food and feed production and related things. And here we got to always look at the process of use, which will finally end in a sort of a product. And this requires validation and certification as well, and this is impossible to do without a clear documentation of provenance. In many cases, we got to provide also proof for legitimate use. This is the case in the biomedical field. This is, but also the case if we're talking about biodiversity in regard with regard to Nagoya Protocol and related things. And when we are talking about reference material, which is very relevant in the research in the medical field as well, we need reference material, and reference material got to be fully documented from the very beginning of sample or material collection until through the whole processing chain. So next slide, please. So, but currently there's nothing really useful here in the world. So specimen and data are mostly completely disconnected. Yeah, you will have some data somewhere in some data silo or data lake, whatever, and you will have some documentation of the specimen in some other place. And there's no really good relation to them. So you cannot go really back from the data through the whole chain of processing back to the specimen itself. And so we need some tool to do so. The other part is that when talking about specimen, we are also talking about biobanks, and biobanks have since 2019 now a accreditation standard. So biobanks can be accredited for their quality. And this is based on the ISO standard 20387, but this demands a comprehensive documentation. Yet this is just a standard that describes specifies the needs or the requirements, but does not specify how this can be done and in which format. So there is until now no way to do this in a standardized way. And then we come to the aspect of products again, and here in the regard to the biomedical field, we are talking about medical products or in vitro diagnostics, where any product is subject to MDD or IVDR, which are very strictly and highly regulated fields. So this is not possible without a fully documentation of the provenance. Next slide, please.
So just 1 minute left, just to jump in.
Okay, just our approach is a coordinated and collaborative development together with EOSC-Life and ISO for a very good reason, because ISO gives us the chance to do a high-level certification and good collaboration with industry. It's based on the W3 Prof standards, and we're talking about here about extension specializations which support the complex workflows in the biotechnology field. We also support opaque data to safeguard privacy issues, enable reputability, and also the forward and backtracking of the provenance. Next slide. So it's just the picture has gone. So there was some picture in there. It has gone to conversion. It's just a depiction of the provenance chain, which is consisting of all parts of the provenance related to the processing, and always each object is linked to the preceding and the following step by some link. Next slide, so we can finish up. So current status is that the fundamental concept is ready and currently under review at the ISO and under publication as well in parallel. We have a common provenance model is forthcoming currently. We do develop domain-specific concepts currently in discussion with the community and experts from all fields which are related to that, and foreseen as an overarching concept which contains then security extensions, which will be, development hasn't started yet, I must say. Okay, thank you, and I'm happily taking your question.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jörg. So we now have just about 10 minutes for questions on fair metrics and the quality and the different tools that we've heard presented there. There was a question in the chat from Sophie Servan to Maaike about whether you're using the results to make statistics. I know you responded to it already in chat, but I don't know if you want to speak out just for anyone who's missed that.
Yes, sure. So we do collect information on our users in the Fairware tool, all completely anonymous. We also encourage our users not to include any personal information in the feedback, so we can keep it completely anonymous. For any personal experiences or personal questions, they can always reach out to us via email or Twitter or anything, and we definitely appreciate personal experiences. I think they really illustrate the use of the tool. But the sort of statistics we collect are our users' roles, their domains, the type of organizations they come from, and they also indicate which parts of the different questions they found most difficult, which is something that we specifically use to create more informative guidance texts on those particular parts.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, there haven't been other questions in the chat specifically linked to this session. So if anyone wants to put one in, actually, Holger's just put one in. What metrics for data quality do you use in your quality assessment? And this is to Irina.
Well, maybe there's not a metric, but with the Viver, the user can check if that data analysis process looks right or not.
Thank you very much. There's been some general chat about fair sharing. So Varsha had asked the question whether people who are developing community standards have registered them in fair sharing. That's led to lots of different comments.
And I would like to add something.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you are aware of the fair implementation profile approach developed by GoFair and EnriFair, which is a tool to landscape fair enabling resources used by research infrastructures and communities, which helps really to encourage the adoption of fair implementations, and also documents the ongoing improvements in this direction. So I just wanted to highlight this. because this is already applied in many different domains also.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking through for other questions. The only other one I see is actually a general question that was to the previous panels. Hujana had asked, what works best to get researchers to use new ontologies, enforcement, encouragement? And I guess we could actually apply the same kind of questions to this. What makes researchers engage in FAIR, or make sure that data are good quality? How do we actually incentivize that? So I don't know if any of the speakers from this block or the earlier block want to reflect on that.
I can go a bit in depth.
Yeah, go ahead, Maaike.
Fairware. I said it a little bit in the presentation already, but our approach is to really start at the root, directly aim for researchers and research supporters, and start with a general understanding of why would I personally want my data to be fair, beyond just the fact that you have to comply with these principles or the fact that your organization asks you to really emphasize what the personal gain is that you can get from it. For example, increased reuse or more citations, and once you find something that really connects with you, you find that motivation to really start implementing the principles.
Yeah, and I think the same applies to standards as well. It's a case of when you've had this issue of not being able to either discover or reuse your own data from several years previous, that's when you see the benefit of actually making sure you document things properly in the future.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else want to reflect on that question? If not, we've got a question to Jörg that we can move to. No? Okay. So a question from Daniel Hutchenreuter asking Jörg, to which levels of detail do you investigate the provenance chains? So for example, you can probably see it in chat. I won't read it all.
Well, yeah, good point. This is really a difficult point. At least we are planning to work on different levels. There will be the need to have basically just the provenance chain itself, which reflects the path, the whole path from the collection of the specimen through processing until data generation. And this is like, yeah, very good. Okay, this picture, that's it exactly that I was missing. But there is a level below that, which is not depicted here because I think it's a size problem. And there's the possibility to attach additional information, specializations, and further information on each of these steps, which is then relating to particularities of the domain or the method. So basically, we are aiming at covering the requirements for each of these methods. Yeah, so it can be detailed as deep as required or demanded. But on the highest level, we just show that the data come from this place and where it was done. So the very fundamental aspects of provenance. Yeah, does this answer your question? So the traceability, I just looked at this. It's a traceability, and yeah, indeed. When it's about measurement traceability, clearly this is information that got to be included. And in these points, which are not yet developed, we got to include domain-specific knowledge as well, and this is something we're currently collecting. Yeah, there are fields I'm experienced in, but there are the fields I cannot talk about. So I'm about analytical methods. It's no problem, but electron microscopy is not my field, I must say. So, but we got to use standards which are, as far as standards are already present, we're going to include these standards which are developed in the community.
Excellent, thank you very much. And Daniel's confirmed that was a perfect answer. Okay, I think that's covered all the questions. If I've missed any, by all means, flag them again in the chat, just repost and we can pick them up. But we'll move on to our final block now, which is about potential solutions. And we actually only have 2 talks. Simon Hodson, unfortunately. Oh no, Simon is here. It was the earlier Simon that couldn't make it. Apologies, Simon. So the DDI for CDI, DDI-CDI for EOSC. Take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking my co-authors for the report, Arafan Gregory and Akim Vakarov, and also to thank the EOS Co-Creation Fund, which funded the report. Next slide, please. So DDI-CDI, that's Data Documentation Initiative Cross-Domain Integration, is a new specification designed to help interoperability and the integration of data between different data types, standards, formats, and across domains. The Data Documentation Initiative is responsible for 2 of the most widely applied and implemented standards in social sciences, DDI Codebook and DDI Lifecycle. And the objective of that organization is very much to create metadata standards that can be easily implemented. CODATA, on the other hand, has a strategic activity to support the interoperability and the reusability in FAIR for global grand challenge research. And that's one of the missions that has been entrusted to us by our parent body, the International Science Council. EOSC, and I think you can see from what I've already said, there's a use case for this approach to cross-domain integration in EOSC. EOSC is concerned to provide open and seamless services for stewardship, analysis, and reuse of research data across borders and across scientific disciplines. And to do that, there's a challenge of interoperability, a challenge of data combination and reuse across domains, and a challenge of scale, the increase in the quantity of data and the need for automation if we're going to use data, if we're going to combine data effectively, even within domains, and certainly, and also for the challenging task across domains for grand challenge research questions like climate change, like disaster risk reduction, like the sustainable development goals, like the growth of cities. So we received a co-creation project to explore the implementation of DDI-CDI, and the report is there. And I also urge you, if you're interested in this, to look at the presentation and the recording from a launch event that we did last week. Next slide, please. So what is DDI-CDI? It was developed specifically in response to demand from DDI Alliance members serving the social, behavioral, and economic sciences to address the use case of using data from other domains. So there are active projects asking for that of the data archives that implement DDI standards and of the members of the DDI Alliance. So the DDI-CDI specification was designed to address this need through 3 very specific means. It has a methodology for describing data structure. And so far there are 4 data structures which are included in that. And essentially that's a toolkit for easy description of data structure, whether that's tabular data, long event data, multidimensional data in the social sciences, not the geospatial type, or key value data. It also has an approach to provenance, to providing provenance information, which is an implementation of PROV augmented with SDTL and other sources of information. And then finally, it presents a simple approach to describing individual datums and associating them with concepts. And that's in the DDI-CDI specification, that's called the variable cascade. And that interacts with the data structure to allow more easy data manipulation. It's a model-driven standard, it's expressed in UML, it's domain independent, and I cannot emphasize this enough. It is designed to fill a gap and to complement domain standards and ontologies, not to replace anything, not to create a monster specification. We think by addressing those three things, we assist in the task of data integration and combining data from different sources, and it can be implemented in a variety of ways. Next slide, please. So the report looked at a set of use cases. I'm not going to go through those in detail. The best simple way to access those is the presentation from last week. With SIR, we looked at granular data and variable subsetting. We explored with Dataverse how DDI-CDI can be implemented and how from existing DDI standards, we can extract automatically the DDI-CDI information. There's already a prototype implementation with the Alpha Network and Inspire Peach, which combines demographic health data with clinical data and phylogenetic tree data, and the other implementations there. Next slide, please.
1 minute left, Simon.
Okay, thank you. 2 slides to show where I think the niche for DDI-CDI is. This is taken from the EOSC interoperability framework and a fairly recognizable, familiar metadata hierarchy, the discovery metadata, DCAT, also the domain standard metadata with detailed information about variables, and DDI-CDI fitting along with other metadata specifications in that middle space of conceptual metadata or structural metadata to help data integration. Next slide, please. A lot has been said or discussed about fair digital objects. And again, this is a slide to indicate that the specific roles that DDI-CDI can play in relation to the automation of how we query against fair digital objects by providing structural metadata, provenance metadata. Next slide, please. So the report contains a set of recommendations and activities which are detailed in the report, and we are now, as a result of the report and the webinar last week, following up with specific use cases and implementations. My appeal is that if you're interested in how DDI-CDI can interact with fair digital objects, please look at that Fair Festival event next week. And next slide, please. Please get in touch. There's a reminder of the report and the webinar. And if you're interested in exploring this further with implementations, whether that's in existing research infrastructures with particular projects or in cross-domain research projects, then please get in touch with me, simon@codata.org or info@codata.org. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And if you want to paste those links to the events in chat, that would be great. And by all means, everyone ask questions ready for the session at the end. So our next presenter is Constance Kurtz from the Helmholtz, who's going to be speaking about the Helmholtz metadata collaboration.
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. Dear colleagues, I'm very pleased to give you a brief introduction into the Helmholtz Metadata Collaboration Platform, HMC. Next slide, please. The idea for creating and setting up the HMC platform was to first identify and then to make the Helmholtz data treasures more visible. To reach this goal, Helmholtz data have to be described by a metadata, at best in a standardized, interoperable, machine-readable format to make the data searchable and findable in search portals and to make them reusable for the future. And hence researchers from all Helmholtz disciplines should be enabled to describe the data properly. But there are also challenges. In HMC, we will focus on the metadata in general and specifically on creating an organizational and technical framework to allow Helmholtz researchers to make their data fair. And since we don't start from scratch, HMC will focus on the I and the R within the FAIR context. Our approach is to provide sustainable services, knowledge and tools to jointly develop and consolidate the metadata expertise among the diversity of the research field and the cultures of the Helmholtz Association. Thus, we will try to turn FAIR into reality on all levels to enable reuse of our Helmholtz data. In total, there are 10 Helmholtz centers participating in HMC, covering all 6 research areas of Helmholtz. Next slide, please. HMC is built up into 4 main areas. The discipline-specific realization of FAIR data is reflected by metadata hubs for each Helmholtz research field. Community experts work on training and technology that you see here on the top in the different colors. The hubs play the role of connectors or interfaces between the research fields and the general technical developments implemented by our FAIR Data Commons group or unit in the middle here in green. They provide technical services and consulting for hubs and researchers along the FAIR principles. Our HMC projects here in purple that can be applied every year with the project call by HMC members outside of the HMC activities also serve as use cases for HMC services, and they are strongly connected to HMC and the service tools. And finally, the HMC office handles and manages and controls the platform. Next slide, please. Now, how do we turn FAIR into reality? The idea is to introduce the FAIR digital objects that we just heard. FDOs are technical helpers to turn FAIR into reality. The idea is to establish a FAIR digital object abstraction layer between data and the tools that you see here in blue. FDOs create a machine-readable description of all kinds of digital objects like metadata and work as an interface between the data infrastructure on the bottom and the application layer and tools on the top to work with the data. Hence, FDOs operate as a classifier conserving expert knowledge on data. The implementation in HMC are of great relevance and will have long-term effects for the reusability of our Helmholtz data. And HMC aims at implementing a framework for the extensive connection of digital objects, PIDs, and metadata. And finally, the implementation of the FDO concept guarantees the connectivity to EU infrastructures such as the EOSC initiative here. Next slide, please. We are currently in the middle of the second funding year and thus still in the stock up and building up phase of HMC. So the last 1.5 years were in the light of setting up the HMC structures, filling the HMC positions and by foundation for a FAIR environment. Our task areas cover the basic technical developments of FDOs and FAIR data. So we have first versions available of a metadata store and a Helmholtz tailored, easy to use metadata standard catalog adopted from the RDA that are available. Our metadata hubs are currently conducting research, specific surveys and mapping of expertise, standards, tools, and workflows. And in addition, we are currently designing and implementing training and consulting programs on infrastructures to provide metadata knowledge. And finally, we have just launched our second HMC project call to integrate community solutions into HMC services in our infrastructures. Next slide, please. With these highly distributed structures among our research fields, HMC has networking opportunities on many levels and domains. Members of HMC are also involved in quite a few funded or currently proposed consortia of the German National Research Data Infrastructure Initiative here. On the international level, our members are contributing to many diverse initiatives like the RDA or the Earth Science Information Partners Group. And of course, everything that we develop here should be in line with the recommendations and specifications provided to EOSC to be connectable in the future. That last slide, please. That brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Constance. So our final presentation will be on the TIB terminology service. Unfortunately, Oliver is not able to make it today, so I need to check my notes. The replacement is Markus Stocker.
That's right. Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody. Yeah, so as Sarah just said, Oliver couldn't make it today. Short minute. I'm trying to give my best to fill in here on the TIB terminology service as a core service for research data infrastructure. Next slide, please. So a little bit of context, this is largely grounded in the national effort to build national research data infrastructure, which is a relatively large effort that has 3 stages, and in the end we should have about 30 largely disciplinary consortia that organize the research data infrastructures, and the idea is to link and enhance existing infrastructures, so nothing like developing largely nothing new, but to build on what exists and try to enhance and link this. And it's a fairly large community-driven process overall. So as you can see here, there's quite a bit of funding here at the national level, about 70 million euros per year. And next slide, please. TIB has been involved very early on in the process. 2 years ago, we were involved strongly in the development of proposals in chemistry, engineering, and culture, and they have been funded now since last year, and they are in the ramp-up phase. Now we are waiting for the final decisions on funding in Earth, data science, and material sciences. And as you can see here on the slide, also we are looking at physics, and potentially also, since it's becoming a topic, also to have cross-cutting and base services, NFTIs. We're looking also at proposals in this domain. Next slide, please. So among many services that you can imagine are relevant for various disciplines, of course, TIB, so the terminology service or some kind of terminology service is also very important. And I'm sure that all of you know why and can imagine what that is. So for all three current disciplinary NFTIs, we are looking at this topic. We did an NFTI, but of course, I think also we all agree that also in the EOSC, this is an important topic, and perhaps there are touch points in the future that we can leverage these services also in the EOSC. Next slide, please. So briefly on the contents, it's the TIB terminology service acts as a backbone for the various NFTIs. So it's multi-domain content that we have here. It's of course conceptual, so semantic specifications. So it's formal descriptions of the terms, but also linguistic, human readable information. We are focused on the red part, the red highlighted aspects here currently. So in many domains there is original content, so terminology described perhaps in non-fair resources like PDFs, and so here we need to leverage these and create new formal ontologies. But of course, in many domains there are also third-party vocabularies that we can leverage. And another aspect that we are looking as a library also at is to curate metadata, have high-quality metadata describing these semantic resources. From the service side, it's not just about setting up a service online and telling the community, okay, look, there is a service and use it. We are also acting as a help desk, so to say, technical support, but also involved in training and consultation. And in addition to having access or providing access to terminology through services, we are also looking at curation, enabling the community to actually curate these resources. And of course, also legal issues and licensing are a topic. From the technical functions, I think there is a lot to say, but of course you need a human-friendly browsing, a lookup. At the same time, you need a machine readability of these terms and the services. And of course, the use of terminology in applications downstream is a focus currently, and again, as a library, ensuring that we have good metadata management and quality control is certainly a focus for TIB as well currently. Next slide, please. So there are
1 minute left.
Yeah, so I have to hurry up. There are 3 basic modules. Lookup and search is a key one. We leverage here on OLS, but also, as I said, curation is important, ensuring that and enabling communities to be able to manage and change this. Protege, Web Protege, and also GitLab, we leverage these services. But as a library, we are looking also at ensuring that these terminologies available long-term and persistent identified and so on. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot of the backbone terminology service at TIB, and which serves various communities. And in the next slide, I have 2 examples. Next slide, please. In chemistry, there are a lot of terminologies available already, and we can leverage those. And an interesting aspect of chem is that it's not just about annotating metadata and data sets, but it's also for inclusion of terminology in things like electronic lab notebooks, ensuring that the terms are machine actionable there as well. And in the next slide, I have another example for in engineering. Engineering is a little bit not so ahead like life science and perhaps also chemistry. So they have a lot of terminology out there, but not in fair resources. And so there is a lot of effort there in ensuring that these terms are translated in fair resources. And then last slide finally shows you a few of the next steps, and I will stop here. Thank you very much for listening.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marcus, and particularly for stepping in last minute for your colleague. So there have been a number of questions in chat, and I think actually all of them have been addressed. So Simon's been busy responding on the DDI questions. I don't know if you want to reflect on some of those verbally, just for people who haven't been following the chat. So questions from Steen about who you'll imagine will be making DDI-CDI, and from Carol on commenting on the effort needed. And in the meantime, if others want to ask questions to Constance and Marcus, please add them to the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I think I responded quite in quite a lot of detail to Steen's question. I mean, you know, and it's very interesting. The specification has been designed to fill a need, and it's designed to be, you know, it's got those three functions that I described. Two of those functions are quite tightly related, but nevertheless, the development team is looking to modularize that and further the work on the toolkit for data structure description. The outcomes of the report are, we think, show pretty strongly that in the case studies we looked at, there's a function, a very useful function that those three aspects can play. The NSD example with the European Social Survey, we think demonstrates that there can be a significant efficiency saving on what they're currently doing by using DDI-CDI to describe the data structure and allow runtime modifications, which they're obliged to make. And that's currently a very labor-intensive process. The prototype with Inspire Peach, and I didn't have time in my presentation, but it's in the to go into that in detail in my presentation, but you know, please look at the report for further detail. That's an implementation with APHRC and other London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine centres in various countries in Africa. It's as lightweight as it can be while preserving the integrity of the data. So in terms of the labour involved, you know, this isn't a specification which has been designed to be metadata perfection. It's designed by people who are very much used to implementing specifications in the social science domain and are responding to the demand to be able to combine data from different sources. So we think it's also relatively practical. But you know, the proof is in the pudding, and you know, to be clear, the production version will be released in July. We've been doing this report during a review process, and then we hope to have further implementations, and that's what we're calling for. Where there are interested parties, where people think that this might fill a need, then we'd be very interested in speaking to people. And as I sort of rushed over a little bit at the end of the presentation, we're following up those conversations from those case studies, and we have a number of new case studies in paleoarchaeology, in smart cities, and with the Helmholtz metadata cooperation collaboration, which we'll be exploring over the next few months.
Excellent, thank you very much. And I see, Constance, you've also replied to Sophie's comment. I think a number of people have spotted links and ways that they can collaborate, and that's great to see from these sessions. If anyone has any other questions, please either speak out or put it in chat quickly. We're in our dying minutes now, just a couple of minutes till the lunch break. We're already halfway through the day. So I'll just take the time to thank all of the speakers. I think you've all kept the time very well, which has made my job easier, and very interesting topics and lots of useful content that can hopefully help in the task forces, giving different examples, you know, things we can build on. What you have next, we have lunch break for half an hour. And then we have the kind of drop-in clinic session that Bob Jones will be running with Marie-Louisa at 1:30. So if you have general questions on EOSC, it's like an Ask Me Anything kind of session. So by all means, bring your lunch and come and chat at that. And then our final session will be at 2 p.m. So big thank you to all of the speakers and to you for attending, and enjoy your lunch.